We now have the full and final results for the elections in both Saxony and in Thuringia, and in this video I want to take a look at the raw numbers to see what each party got and also contrast it to both what the polls were saying and what the 2019 results were. And this is going to be kind of a general overview of both states, and tomorrow and Tuesday I will do another video taking a deeper look into the numbers in each state, maybe talking about the demographic differences with age and different work groups, and see how the states voted, and also talk more about the coalition formations, what governments can be formed after this. But this is going to be kind of a general overview of the basics in each state now that we have the full kind of finalized numbers after all the votes have been counted and all the seats have been properly distributed. Now we're going to start with the state of Thuringia. And in the state of Thuringia, we had a very big victory for the AFD. They won their first state election ever, and this was a big milestone for the party. The left, Die Linke, and the Greens have both been able to achieve that. Die Linke in Thuringia and the Greens in Baden-Württemberg. So now the AFD is another party outside of the CDU and SPD, one of the kind of third parties, if you will, that has managed to win a state on their own. Now the AFD has won states within federal elections or European parliamentary elections. We're the largest party within a state at a federal-wide election. However, this is the first time they've won a state at a statewide election at Landtagswahl, and they have won 32.8%, going up 9 points from the 23.4 they got in the last election. So pretty much a 10-point swing from their previous result, which was already a huge increase. So not only did they win with over 30% of the vote, they had a 10-point lead over the CDU, which was behind them in second place. So this is a big victory, a big milestone for the AFD, but also a very important victory for Björn Höcke, the leader of the party in this state, who is a very well-known figure in German politics, very controversial in Germany, but also very well-known in the party. And so this will be a victory for him and his branch, but also the AFD federally, because this will be covered in Germany, and the whole country will, of course, see this result. Now, the result for the CDU is not a bad result. The CDU went from 21.7 up 2 points to around 23.6. So some slight increases. Of course, Mario Vogt, the leader of the CDU, has positioned himself as a main candidate against the AFD. He wants to become governor, and so these increases do help them. He has kind of solidified his position. The CDU is very stable. They did not increase by a lot, but they were able to, at least make some gains, which is very contrary to other places where the CDU has suffered some losses, especially, of course, in Eastern Germany. Now, the result for the CDU, historically speaking, is not that great. The CDU in the past has been able to get 30, 40, even winning an absolute majority. However, times have changed, and of course, now that we have a bunch of different political parties competing instead of just the CDU, SPD, and maybe PDS that we had in the 90s or 2000s, it's understandable that parties, even that once were very strong, are now able to only win around 20-30%, and that's still a good result for them because we have a much more divided political field than we did, say, 10-20 years ago. So the standards for parties are, of course, a lot lower, or the standards for how much they are expected to get rather is a lot lower. So a very moderate result for the CDU. They were able to increase their results some, so it's going to be a good number for them. They also won second place, which was not the case in 2019. They fell from first to third, so they were able to retake second place, but of course still being behind the AFD. But for government formation, they might be in a good position. The BSV Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht won 15.8%. This was slightly less than what the polls were saying by a few points, but nonetheless, for a new party that was founded less than a year ago, this is very important. They not only crossed the 5% threshold to win seats, but they also got over 10-15%, and also they are the third largest party. The BSV split away from Die Linke, and so for the fact that the BSV has beat Die Linke shows that it has effectively kind of become the main left-wing party in the state. It is going to be able to challenge Die Linke and SPD for the legitimacy of holding the position as the kind of left-wing populist party. And this is very important for that identity crisis within the left that I've talked about in some of my videos. So the BSV has managed to defeat Die Linke. And if you see the results for Die Linke, of course, you can see, of course, it was catastrophic. Now, the governor of this state is Bodo Ramelow. He is from Die Linke. He's the incumbent governor. He's still there until this new parliament was sworn in. And he was a very popular governor. His approval rating was high, but Die Linke as a party was suffering catastrophic problems. And after the BSV split away, that was basically, unsalvageable. And so Die Linke, despite Bodo Ramelow's popularity and his strength in the state, the party has just so much, baggage, politically speaking, so they've suffered heavy losses. Now, this 13.1%, of course, is a drop for them. They dropped around 18 points from 31 to 13. So they suffered catastrophic losses. However, this is actually not the worst result for them, because in other states they're actually falling below 5%, as we'll see in Saxony. And it's actually the case that Ramelow, the fact that Bodo Ramelow is here, actually saved them to keep them above 5%, kept them at 13%. If he had not been here, this could have been even worse. So of course, when you look at it compared to 2019, it's a catastrophic disaster for Die Linke. But when you look at it compared to other states, it's not a terrible result. It is going from first to fourth. They are losing over 2/3 of their voters, but they are still above 10%. They are still represented in the state, which is not a given in others. So this was, an okay result. This was pretty much in line with what the polls were saying, so nothing too shocking here. The results for the SPD and Greens are, pretty much all the results here were in line with what the polls were saying in terms of the place each party got, and the numbers is somewhat variation. The BSV got a few points less. The AFD got a few points more. The SPD got 6.1% of the vote. This was a drop in 2 points. This was their worst result in this state's history, but also one of the worst results they've ever gotten any German state elections since 1949, since the foundation of the Federal Republic. So this was a bad result for them. However, they did manage to cross the 5% mark, so they are going to retain representation in the state legislature. So considering that it was a possibility they could fall below 5%, this will be seen as an okay result for them. But of course, 6% is not where the SPD wants to be. On the other hand, the Greens dropped 2 points and fell below the 5% threshold. They lost all their seats in representation in the Thuringian state legislature, and so of course this will be a bitter night for the party in this state. You also have the FDP, which was represented in 2019 where they won 5%, re-entering the legislature, dropped 4 points, only winning 1%, and of course will not gain any seats. Now the results, of course, a big victory for the AFD, a moderate victory for the CDU. The BSV has entered in the legislature for the first time. They maybe wanted a bit more, but considering they're a new party, this is a victory for them. So we see, of course, a victory for the AFD, the CDU, and the BSV, and a disastrous results for the left, and the SPD and Greens were basically nowhere. Same with the FDP. And this was actually similar to the results we've seen in Hessen and in Bavaria. The parties of the federal government, the SPD, Greens, and FDP, are not gaining anything, and they're still losing, even from results in 2019 that were already very bad. Die Linke itself is suffering a lot of problems, and so we see the parties that have kind of asserted themselves as the opposition to the federal government are doing very well. The governing parties and then Die Linke itself, because of its internal problems, are all suffering losses. This is similar to what we saw in Hessen and in Bavaria. So we see 3 big winners, all winning first, second, and third, and then a drastic change in the landscape, of course, with Die Linke ceasing to be a major dominant force in this state for the first time in decades. Now I want to take a look at the government formation for Thuringia. Now, there was one possible coalition that was talked about even on some of the German news channels, some of the German media, and that was a coalition of the CDU, the BSV, and the SPD. Now, there are a couple of problems with this, but I first want to just look at the numbers. Obviously, the AFD is the largest party. Traditionally, they would be the party to form a government. However, every party, as of now, has ruled out working with them, and that is going to make forming a government very hard. Now, the CDU can work with the SPD easily, but they only have together 29 of the needed 45 seats. The BSV is arguably more to the left of the CDU of positions than Die Linke is, and maybe to the right on others. Now, the CDU and the left, once cooperation between them was basically out of the question. However, in Thuringia, it has become increasingly harder to form a government, and so we had a minority government in power that was tolerated by the CDU. And so cooperation between the CDU and the left, or even the CDU and the BSV, although it is very taboo, unorthodox, although it's very problematic and unstable, it has become a reality in this state because it's so hard to form, it's impossible to form a government otherwise. And so one of the possibilities was a coalition between the CDU, the SPD, and the BSV. In the polls, it was showing it a majority. However, in the final results, they have fallen 1 seat below. And so what this means effectively is that the only, if you look at the alternative, CDU, SPD, and Die Linke, there is, of course, no majority there as well. This means that the only government with a majority that can be formed without the AFD is a coalition of the CDU, BSV, and Die Linke. And, of course, this has problems, because this is not only the BSV working with the CDU, which is a somewhat neoliberal center-right party, very Atlanticist. It's also working with Die Linke, which is similar to them on some issues. And so this is the only choice that the parties have if they do not want to work with the AFD. And it's problems for all 3 ways. The Die Linke is not really on good terms with the BSV, and the Die Linke and the CDU is just also not very, it's not a practical, logical coalition. So as we can see here, forming a government is going to be very, very difficult. But we could even have, snap elections. It's not entirely out of the question that no government is formed and then the parliament dissolves itself and we have new elections. That could happen, but we will have to see. So for this state, as you can see, the big result for the AFD has made a government formation nearly impossible. The AFD and BSV could also form a government together. That's not necessarily out, 100% out of the question, although the BSV has ruled it out as of now. Things could change, but the fact that the AFD and BSV have won a majority shows that for the traditional Western-oriented parties, it is very hard for them to win or to hold a majority in these states in the East. And so that's going to be it for this state, and I want to take a look now at the results for Saxony. Now, if we take a look at Saxony, it's a very different picture than in Thuringia. Not too much different, but there is, of course, some variation in the positions of the parties. Here, in contrary to Thuringia, the CDU did manage to win and beat the AFD. So the AFD did not win first place in Saxony. They did win some support. They did gain some, but they were still in second place. The CDU won 31.9% of the vote, a drop of only 0.2. So this is almost exactly what they got in 2019. And all things considered, this was a big victory for them. They were able to maintain their position as the largest party despite a surging AFD. So this will be seen as a victory by the CDU. Now, I will suspect that a lot of the reason the CDU was able to remain so stable is because they are no longer in the federal government. A lot of the negative results for the SPD, the Greens, and the FDP are due to the fact that they are part of the current federal government in Berlin, which is very unpopular. And during the Merkel era, when the CDU was leading the federal government under Merkel as their chancellor, they were suffering results in state elections because of that negative influence from the federal politics. So now that the CDU is in the opposition, they don't have that. But if we see in 2025 someone like Friedrich Merz elected as the chancellor, then the problems facing Germany will start to rub off on these elections. You will see an influence, and if a CDU-led federal government starts to have a lower and lower approval rating, then the CDU will start to see the results reflect that in the statewide elections as well. So I think the fact that the CDU is in the federal opposition has helped them to maintain a solid result in a lot of these states, also in Hessen, as we saw in 2023. Now, the result for the AFD is interesting because it's not as big of a gain, but it's almost on line with what the result is in Thuringia. And a part of that is because the AFD in Saxony was a lot stronger than even the East German standard. In Brandenburg, in Thuringia, and in Saxony-Anhalt, they were all around 23-24%. Saxony was the only state where they were nearing the 28% mark. So, of course, they were already very strong in 2019. But so there wasn't as much room for them to grow, but nonetheless, they did gain around 3 points, going from 30.6. So they did cross the 30% mark. That is a big chunk of the vote. They are winning, a third of the seats in the legislature. So despite the fact that they didn't win first place, they did gain on off what was a already very strong result. The BSV here did weaker than in Thuringia and also weaker than what the polls were showing, winning around 11.8%. Nonetheless, like I said, this is the first time that they have contested these elections as a party less than a year old, and them winning over 10% of the vote, yet alone 5%. This is, of course, a big victory for them. They're also the third largest party, so they are ahead of all the other left-wing parties, and they can, of course, use that, legitimize themselves as a new left-wing force, kind of a successor to Die Linke, representing the East German interest if they wanted to. Now, the SPD suffered some losses here, but of course the SPD was already very low, so there wasn't really much change in the result. This is not a good result for them. They suffered losses on top of what was already historical lows. And this is a state where, 100 years ago, the SPD was very strong in. This is one of their heartland states. It does have a cultural significance to the SPD. And the fact that they're not even, competing here, and the fact that they're having to fight to hold the 5%, to get across the line, to maintain representation, is bad for the party. Now, of course, if they weren't part of the federal government, they might be able to cross, 9-10%, but even there is not really a very strong result. And that's not a given. The SPD has suffered losses when they were part of a junior partner in the coalition, and so it's not a given that once the Schultz government is replaced that there will be a surge for the SPD. So, of course, a bitter result for them. The Greens as well, only winning 5.1%. They did suffer some losses here. The Greens had finally, in around 2018, 2019, been able to win and make gains in the eastern states, and that has kind of receded. You were seeing the Greens win in the major cities, but outside of that, they are suffering in East Germany. Now, what's interesting is the results for Die Linke. Now, Die Linke won 4.5%. They fell below the 5% threshold, losing around half their votes, and around half their seats. However, Saxony has a caveat in the way the 5% threshold works, and that is if a party wins 2 direct mandates, 2 direct seats, that party can enter into the legislature with proportional representation. And Die Linke and the Greens were able to pull that off. In Leipzig and in Dresden, the 2 big cities in Saxony, there are a lot of seats that are very heavily supported by with large voter groups for Die Linke and the Greens. The Greens won 2 direct mandates and Die Linke won 2 direct mandates. So although the left fell below the 5% threshold, they won those 2 direct mandates and they were able to win seats proportionally, but nonetheless they did suffer losses. And it is also significant they fell below 5% because then they're relying on a backup plan to get into the legislature. You also had the Free Voters that lost some support. The Freie Sächsische Party to the right of the AfD, a kind of nationalist party, but it's also regionalist. It's only in Saxony. They got 2%. And what's interesting is, of course, the FDP is not even present here, and the FDP got only 0.9% of the vote, a bitter disaster for the FDP in this state, and of course across East Germany in general. And so overall, the results, victory for both the CDU and AfD, the CDU maintaining first place, the AfD winning support, getting a big chunk of the vote, the BSV as well, and then you see the SPD Greens, the left, the FDP just struggling, losing on top of what were already historically bad results, so going nowhere, not really being a major player in these elections at all. Now, if we take a look at the formation of a government in Saxony, of course, it's a lot different. It's somewhat more easier, but not too easy. Now, the government of the CDU, Greens, and SPD does not have a majority. They were technically voted out of office, but the CDU is the largest party. They have the mandate to form a new government. You could include Die Linke in it, but that is already 4 parties. I mean, even if they were ideologically similar, that is going to be difficult, dividing up the ministries and positions to 4 different parties. There is the BSV as well, but of course Sarah Wagenknecht has spoken out against working with the Greens. So you could have a government of the CDU, SPD, and the BSV here, but even that is going to be difficult because it is not a given that the BSV will be able to work with the SPD or CDU, and that's just going to be something that has to be worked out over the next few weeks and months. Of course, the AfD is very strong. If the BSV wanted to work with them, well, here is an instance where they actually couldn't form. They don't have a majority, and there's no chance of really any of the other parties. Of course, the AfD and CDU could work together. There has been some people in the CDU that have spoken out and maybe wanted to work with the AfD, maybe not forming a government, but maybe on some issues, look at policy per policy or look at forming a minority government. But even then, that is still a minority within the CDU, and it is very, very unlikely that any cooperation with the AfD will happen, whether it be the CDU or the BSV. So as we can see, as it is in Thuringia, forming a government in Saxony will be difficult as well. So, of course, that's going to be it for this video. Hope everyone liked it, and I will do some more on these results, taking a deeper dive. But this is kind of a general overview of the numbers, kind of explaining what the results are, what they meant, and I will do some more videos in the next few days. And, of course, we will focus on now the Brandenburg election, see how maybe these results will affect that, how the coalition talks might affect Brandenburg, and also we'll talk about the upcoming Austrian elections, both the state and federal. So that's going to be it for this video, and I hope everyone liked it. If you do, please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you for watching.